Good morning, YouTube. Another week has gone by, and got a little bit done with the 5.4 twin cam swap this week. The engine is sitting in the mounts. I don't know if I can get y'all in here to take a look. I got the oil filter on too, but that mount is bolted in, as you can see, and you probably can't see it behind the oil filter. Maybe you can actually, if I just pivot you down a little bit. That's about the best view you're going to get, sorry. But both motor mounts are in the pockets. They're bolted in. We have the 2-valve oil pan on, and inside that oil pan is the Shelby GT 500 pickup tube. So got that done, and check that out. Some nice pretty new fuel lines, brand new OEM. Got a good deal on those off of eBay. You know, those of y'all that work on stuff probably know you have to get creative when it comes to finding parts. Well, this chassis, when I bought it, the fuel lines were in it, but they had been cut. And you know, when you work on these trucks, you see that a lot with these old F150s. So I looked high and low for new original fuel lines, and the prices I was seeing were just ridiculous. I think the cheapest set was like 400 bucks. And so I started searching by part number, and I come across that set. I want to say they were a little under 100 bucks shipped, and they're correct for this vehicle. Now hopefully they fit the Navigator fuel lines. May have to do some magic, but I'm sure we'll get it. Also, we got the rear transmission mount put on, but the only issue we're having now as far as mounting the engine is in the rear cross member. Oh, I'm getting old. Let me see if I can do this. Yeah, you see we're still held up with a block of wood. That is actually the 4R70W cross member, which I read a few places online that you could just reverse it and it would bolt up to the 4R100 transmission and bolt to the frame, but that is not correct. That is actually the correct installation, face in the correct direction, because it won't reverse. I don't know if you can tell from this angle. The transmission has to be pivoted a little bit to the right for the drive shaft to clear the fuel tank, the muffler, and if you notice, even the rear axle, the way they're built, the pumpkin is a little bit to the right, so everything lines up. Anyway, so you can't really reverse a cross member since they're made like that. So the only option is to get the correct cross member, which I could remove off of you sitting right here. I could yank that cross member off, but it feels wrong to turn a perfectly running and driving vehicle into parts over something like a cross member. And if I needed the motor, the transmission, okay, whole different story. But I'm not going to go tearing a vehicle apart and rendering it undrivable over a cross member. So I found one online for about $88 shipped, the correct one for our 4R100 from a Navigator. So hopefully it gets here soon and we can bolt it up, and that way the engine is bolted into the chassis and we can begin the second phase, which is hooking everything up and completing that part of the installation. So the next thing I want to do is put the correct valve covers on. These are actually on here just for installation. I knew that we were going to have to rock this motor and that it would bang against everything and that the chain from the hoist would be rubbing against it. So I wasn't going to put my nice new valve covers on. These are actually an old set, I think off an Aviator, or they might even be Navigator valve covers. I can't remember. Yeah, they are Navigator valve covers. Let's see the 54L on the tag there. Anyway, these are on here just for the installation. Anyway, so now the next thing I think I want to do is put the new pretty valve covers on. I got some ones that I painted Ford Racing blue, and put the intake manifold on, begin hooking everything up. I've got an AC compressor, I've got a power steering pump. I think I have 90% of the parts I need to start hooking everything up. And before we put the core support, oh, I'm bumping into everything here. Before I put the core support back on, we're going to test fire the engine. See if it fires up, see if it runs, and Once we verify that it's running with no crazy noises, no knocking, no rattling, nothing crazy, then we'll weld the core support back onto the truck and complete it. All that sounds really easy, like you can do it in one day, and we're honestly probably a month or two away from any of that, because I work a lot, and I really only get one true day a week with work and school to even mess with this. So the other thing is the exhaust manifolds. So I have long tube headers. They're actually for a 2-valve, but they can be easily modified to fit this 4-valve motor. And I'm debating if I even want to bother putting those on or not. I threw these manifolds on just to plug the exhaust ports. You can see the paper towel still stuffed in the opening there. It was mainly to keep debris and bugs and everything away from the engine, so I just zipped those on when I was putting the motor together. And they don't even have gaskets in them, so even if I decide to keep these manifolds, I do need to pull them off, put the gaskets in, and put them back on. The cool part about this motor, it's from a clean southern vehicle, because I live in southern Texas. So those studs, they don't break down here. You know, all those horror stories you read about those nuts and studs breaking off and having to weld a nut on to get on, that doesn't happen here. So they'll just zip right off and without any trouble. Other things I got to do to shift linkage. That one, it's kind of hanging down right there. That's actually a 4R70W shift linkage. I've got a 4R100 one. And like any other 4R100, I had the problem where the shift bracket bolt hole broke off. So I'm going to have to figure out what to do about that. Then there's running new transmission cooler lines, because as you can see, this one here is cut and that one's looks like it's a little bent up. I got one of those universal kits with AN lines and a universal cooler. Quite a few people said I shouldn't have any problem with that. Famous last words, huh? So we'll see. So all in all, the lessons I learned on this swap so far is try to keep with original stock parts as much as possible. When I was building this engine, had I known what I know now, I would keep the stock oil pump, stock pickup tube, and stock oil pan for sure, because that gave me a lot of headache because I went with the larger stuff, and it was more trouble than what it was worth. Get everything, because I assumed what I read was correct about the cross member, and I read several people that have done this swap. They all said they had to get the Navigator cross member. And I can't remember where I read that you could reverse the 4R70W one, but apparently that wasn't correct. Now, the other thing is the wiring. I talked to a gentleman on Facebook who's actually done this swap. He actually lives 100 miles from me. And he says everything should just plug right in. That's the transmission harness right there. And I pulled it off a Navigator at the junkyard, so 4R100 should be fine. He says you have to run a couple of wires for a coolant sensor is all he had to do, but we'll see. The wiring, actually, I don't think will be too much trouble. Famous last words. You know, I'll probably be regretting that when that time comes, but who knows. Anyway, that's where we're at with the Navigator swap. It is in, it's bolted, which is kind of a milestone in itself to be in the chassis and bolted up. Next step is cross member, getting that in. Fuel lines are installed. I don't know how you would have done the fuel lines with the transmission all bolted up, because it's a little bit tedious. You have to bolt it to the back of the transmission. It wasn't that difficult because the transmission was pivoted down because it wasn't mounted at the back, so it's actually fairly easy to run the fuel lines. But yeah, next step, mount the transmission, get the cross member up, then start putting the accessories on the engine, the intake manifold, the valve covers, hook up the fuel lines, start doing all the under the hood kind of stuff that needs to be done. Before we fire it, we'll also drop the fuel tank or remove the bed, whichever. Get that fuel tank cleaned out, because this truck has sat for over 10 years without running. Matter of fact, I'll show y'all the registration sticker. Check that out. Last registered in 2011. So the last time this truck was probably on the road was 2010. Can you imagine? And of course, there's things like the brakes. I don't think it's got fluid. It's obviously gonna need brakes, suspension work, all that fun stuff. So it's a long way from being roadworthy. But anyway, whenever I make some progress, give y'all another update. And as always, thank you for watching.